Hi everyone, welcome to today's presentation. My name is Michaela Magnuson and I am part of ERG's webinar support team. Before we get started, let's review a few housekeeping items. Audio is available for this presentation through your computer's mic and speakers or by telephone. Your call-in number, as well as your access code, is in the control panel box on the right-hand side of your screen. All attendees have been muted to minimize background noise. If you have questions during the presentation, please type it into the questions box on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will have two dedicated times to answer questions after part 1 and part 2 of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please send us a message to the chat box and I will troubleshoot the issues. Before I turn it over to our speaker, let's take a quick poll to see who is on today's call. So, what type of organization are you affiliated with? Please select one of the following: government, academic institution, private institution, nonprofit, or other. It looks like the majority of you are with government institutions at 56%, 31% from academic institutions, 9% from nonprofits, 2% from private institutions, and 2% for others. And thank you for taking that poll. And with that, I'll pass it over to today's speaker, Kathy Davey.
Hello, everyone. I am Kathy Davey. I'm in the Prevention Strategies and Implementation branch at EPA. That is in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. And it is the branch that runs the Pollution Prevention Program and the two grant programs, the Pollution Prevention Grant Program and the Source Reduction Assistance Grant Program. I want to thank you, Michaela, for hosting and moderating the webinar. And a thank you to everyone for joining and participating in this GoToWebinar. For everyone who registered, we have a very nationwide group, I think. It looked like about 35 states represented. So that sort of indicates a national distribution. Webinars have given us a safe way to keep our professional engagements going and socially distance at the same time. It's safe to say that we are part of the noticeable shift in the number of webinars happening on a day-to-day basis. Our branch at EPA has been active in increasing the number of our webinars, and the idea for this one came at the behest of my colleagues. I am forced to admit that their idea of having a webinar on grant reporting is a pretty useful idea, because here we are in the final quarter of the federal fiscal year, and that would probably be just about the time that grantees would be, that everyone would be brushing up on the reporting requirements that were provided in the request for proposals. So let's get started. We will have time to go over everything. Okay, so let me figure out the mode I'm in here to advance the screens. I'm in full screen mode. Oh, there we go. All right. Sort of a newbie. So for many of you might recognize our picture that we have here. I confess I had to search for it and then recognize it. It is of a dairy, which is a sector that P2 technical providers are well known for assisting. Okay. Again, I don't know why. Michaela, when I'm hitting my arrows on my keyboard, okay, there we go. All right. Very good. Welcome to our programs webinar on reporting grant results achieved in fiscal year 2020. The webinar at a glance. Let me see, let me get manage control of my screen. It's broken down into two parts. The first part is going to cover our context for reporting, the scope, that is the breadth, the range of what's included for reporting in this fiscal year, and what outcomes are eligible for reporting. And then that's where we'll pause and have discussion after that. And then we will begin part two, which delves into the reporting requirements. We will first focus on those for fiscal year 2018 to 19 grantees, because this is a year where reporting from those grants is timely and expected. There will be an opportunity to dip back. We will actually conduct a second poll at this point to see if reviewing any of the requirements from the 16-17 grantees is needed. This is optional, not required reporting. But if the poll indicates that there are some who would be interested in this, we do have it built in here if we need it. And then we will end with a preview of the reporting requirements for the upcoming 2021 grantees and provide some comparisons of how the requirements are evolving over time. So gladly take your questions, and my email is listed here. Hi, everybody. So here we go into our context for reporting. This is a statement of our expectations as we laid out in the request for proposals and this latest round in the request for applications. And it's fueled by our vision of the promise of the P2 community. So I think I'll just read through this. We expect our P2 and SRA grantees to provide technical assistance, provide recommendations for P2 actions that can be adopted, and report the recommendations to EPA. Then we expect grantees to follow up with the facilities assisted to determine the following information and to report it to EPA. Which of the recommended actions were implemented, the outcomes from that implementation, and for any recommendations not implemented, whether the facility intends to implement them within the next 5 years. And if not, what the barrier to implementation is. So the benefits of reporting, it certainly is an administrative requirement, but for our community, it's more than that. It provides raw data that can be very beneficial for sharing. This reporting enables EPA to assemble what is reported into a database that is searchable to the broader P2 community and interested facilities. That database is in the works. So reporting allows for this ever-evolving, unbroken chain of P2 knowledge, and that's why it's particularly important for these grants in this program. So moving into part two, the scope of what can be reported in fiscal year 2020. And so that would be a combination of any recommendations made in fiscal year 20, and then all outcomes achieved in fiscal year 2020. So for the current FY18-19 grantees, that RFP required that when recommendations are made in a year, even if no outcomes are achieved yet, that they be reported to EPA so we can know about them. So all P2 outcomes achieved includes these other 2 points as well, which is that if you were a prior P2 grantee, like the 16-17 funded grants, you also have the opportunity to report and get credit for outcomes from P2 technical assistance you provided under these past grants, if those results were achieved in fiscal year 20. So if you know about them, or if you check back for them, and some of these facilities are visited in multiple year cycles. So if you find out about them, you can report them. So that's included in what we consider to be the scope of fiscal year 2020 reporting. And just to be, so here's an opportunity to just talk about what fiscal year 2020 means. So we're talking about the federal fiscal year, which runs from October 1st to September 30th. So to be achieved in fiscal year 2020 requires that P2 outcomes started sometime between October 1st and September 30th. And that the one exception is for state leadership programs that are supported by EPA grantees. It's enough for a leadership program to conduct its review of latest annual results received from participating facilities in time to report those results to EPA for fiscal year 2020. That's just a realistic concession to how those how state leadership programs operate. Now, the outcomes that are eligible for reporting. For outcomes to be eligible to be reported, they must satisfy our EPA P2 program, programmatic standards and metric standards. We're going to go over them here. We have a link to a document which addresses this topic. What's on our website right now is a link to the 2015 version. We are revising it for 2021 grant recipients. It's probably going to be called instructions, and that will appear in time for the fall. Okay, first we're going to talk about, the programmatic standards. So for P2 grants, what's needed are outcomes from business facilities. That has to do with our statutory language and EPA's interpretation of our statutory language. So that would mean that for leadership programs that are funded as P2 grants, what we ask is that when the results are reported to EPA, that the non-business results are excluded from what's reported to us. For source reduction assistance grants, outcomes from businesses and institutions, governments, nonprofit, and community facilities, these are all eligible for reporting. Lastly, results must come from confirmed actual implementation of P2 actions. So what we're trying to avoid is getting reports of what people think might be implemented, but where they haven't checked to see if they were implemented. We're interested in understanding the difference. And, we're interested in what was actually implemented. Okay, so our last section here in part 1, our metric standards. I think many of folks on the line know our 4 program outcome measures. We're going to go over them here. And many aspects of reporting on them is very intuitive, but there are a few additional notes here that may be less intuitive and may take some additional awareness. So first I want to talk about our measure for the hazardous materials. So we're looking for reductions measured in pounds of either both hazardous materials used and any hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants released. So materials used and hazardous pollution. So we consider the range of eligibility to be the materials and pollutants of concern under federal and state statutes, hazardous materials and pollutants of concern under federal and state statutes. Since we're going to talk next about a certain aspect of air pollution, we note under the eligible arena that we're going to talk about SOx and NOx. So that's sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide emissions. So they are reportable if they are from cutting back on the use of what boilers emit. And there is this other area where the SOx and NOx reductions are attributed to the use of grid electricity and managing the use of that electricity so that less is used. So because these emissions are traded under EPA regulatory caps for the utility industry, they are not to be reported because these reductions are traded among utilities. So that's a general EPA policy, not to report them. We would also note that because we have our own greenhouse gas measure, just make sure not to report CO2 reductions under this metric. Okay, another note here on water pollution. Obviously, the water itself is not pollution, so we ask that the water weight be excluded when reporting to us. There are two ways to accomplish this. The facility that you're working with probably has a water permit methodology that could be used to calculate this, or we accept a simple rule of thumb, which is adequate for our purposes, to simply divide the wastewater weight by 50,000 as an adequate approximation. And lastly, we note that because this measure is about hazardous stuff, that non-hazardous materials are not to be reported. Any reductions in non-hazardous materials, either in their use or through recycling, are not to be reported under this measure. Okay, our metric gallons of water saved. It's pretty straightforward. We would note that, this can be calculated either by looking at the reduction of incoming water used. It could be a reduction in outgoing wastewater released, just so long as you don't count twice. And if there's a green infrastructure project, the conservation of source water can also be reported. Next, our greenhouse gas measure, metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. This is our measure, so we ask that the reporting occur in that measure, not pounds of CO2, for example. We do offer a calculator on our website that is handy for doing conversions from simply different units like pounds of CO2. It does the conversions from energy use units, kilowatts, various fuels, and so forth. So it should make it fairly easy to report in our unit. Then we have something that is conditionally eligible to be reported. So if the primary action occurring at a facility accomplishes, reduction in hazardous materials and or hazardous releases and or water use and or energy use, so if that's the primary thing which hits the notes for our measures, then when incidental non-hazardous reductions are achieved at that facility as a result of the technical assistance, you can convert those to this measure, metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and report them. And EPA's WARM tool, which is from the waste program and is easily found online, can be used to do the conversions. Now, the flip side of that is if the non-hazardous reductions were the primary action accomplished as a result of a site visit, we ask that those not be reported to us. And the rationale here is that we want to capture the under the conditionally eligible one, we want to capture the value of the CO2 reduction, which really can be achieved this way. But we also want to restrain the pursuit of having non-hazardous reductions become a priority for our program. So this is kind of how we balance these competing considerations. Now coming into our last one here, the dollar savings. P2 is known for its economic benefits, which are often present, not always, but often. So indeed, it is a measure of our program. The dollar savings associated with achieving reductions in accomplished through the other things we've established as measures, reducing hazardous material use or hazardous releases, water use, and or energy use, including savings from reduced regulatory burden. The only thing that is the important relationship is that the dollar saving comes from one of our accomplishing one of our environmental outcomes. So things to be aware of. If the cost savings are achieved from improving non-value-added processes, and we'll refer to those here in the next sentence, but it's often a feature of certain kind of technical assistance. And if those improved processes do not have impacts in terms of reducing hazardous materials or releases, and if it doesn't have the impact of reducing energy or water use, then we ask, do not, the requirement is not to report them. Now, non-value-added processes are also referred to as lean and human factors assessments to minimize overproduction, to minimize supply chain delays or inappropriate processing, to minimize excess inventory or like unnecessary motions and defects. So because while those activities have value, they are not really associated with P2 goals. So they're not to be reported, and it would, to report them creates a level of cost savings that end up being reported that are not entirely reflective of what our program goals are, and that's why it's important so that we can keep our representation of cost savings from P2 accurate. That cost savings that are not associated with achieving P2 outcomes they should not be reported to us. And lastly, similar to the prior page, where the relationship to work that this ancillary work that is done on non-hazardous materials or non-hazardous waste, cost savings from that is not to be reported. Again, this is to make sure that it's to keep non-hazardous reductions from becoming a sort of a de facto priority of the program, and to make sure that cost savings that are reported relate to our metrics, our environmental metrics. So that completes part one. And now is an open time for questions and discussion.
All right, we did have a few questions come in through the chat box. First one is, can you explain what leadership programs are?
Good question. So leadership programs are, they've been around for a while, and I will do my best to explain them. They are sort of come from the era when EPA had a performance track, and it was facilities can join as members of the program. They meet certain standards. They seek to achieve certain outcomes. They sometimes it is through the words will come to me, but So it is usually run by the state. So the state will acknowledge participating entities for their work. They get recognition. They often have different tiers that they can achieve, levels of commitment that they make to continuous improvement in their facility. They generally need to have a clean enforcement record. So they tend to have membership that persists year after year. They are indeed state programs. And so sometimes the scope of those programs includes things that are broader than our definition of pollution prevention, but they include our definition of pollution prevention. And I would say there might be 8 to 10 of them across the country of these kinds of programs run by states.
Okay.
I hope that's adequate.
The next question we got is, could you provide an example of a non-business result as referenced on slide 12?
Okay. So if somebody reported outcomes from a local government facility, that would not be considered a business. If somebody reported results from, and that would be like in the state government example, if they did something at their own facility that reduced their water use or reduced their energy use, for example, and they reported that, we would not consider that business. We would consider that government. And that kind of work would need to be reported under a source reduction assistance grant and not under a P2 grant. In leadership programs, sometimes they can even have federal facilities that participate in their leadership programs and achieve results. We would not consider those business outcomes. We would consider those federal government outcomes, and that could not be reported under a P2 grant. So there are some examples. I hope that suffices.
All right, another question we got. It seems like sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides are emission or waste, not material. In your boiler example, the nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides are emissions prevented, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. The next question, if energy is saved kilowatt hours, do you report in MTCO2E only?
Did I hear that if the energy savings are captured in kilowatt hours? Is that what was said? Could you repeat that?
Yes, I believe. So the question is, if energy is saved kilowatt hours, do you report in MTCO2E only?
Good question. That's a great question. We would very much like to see the watt hours in comments. So while our measure is what it is, the MTCO2E, understanding how those are achieved is really important information. And so if using, when we get to the second part of this and we're looking at the templates that EPA has provided for reporting, there should be a comment field. It's very helpful to get both, to have our measure and then to understand where it came from, watts or fuel consumption, or maybe even a certain chemical with high global warming potential. Understanding how that MTCO2E is achieved is vital information, and we'd love to see it.
the next question we got. If your grant is ending September 30th, 2020, do we need to submit both an FY 2020 report and final grant report?
Well, good question. I might beg out of this one a little bit and refer the question to perhaps Michelle Amhaz in our program. I think they can be combined, but I'm really not in the best position to answer that question, but it is a good question. So this might be a follow-up to me on my email, and then I'll forward it to the right person and get you the right answer.
Thank you. All right. So
unless there's somebody else on the line from EPA who can fill in on a chat and provide the answer here. Go ahead, Michaela.
One of the final questions we got. You seem to make a distinction between businesses under P2 versus institutions, government, nonprofit, and community under SRA. Are you saying under a P2 grant, the funds should not be used to work with those you listed under SRA?
Good question. I think you might generally say that that is the design. Now, we know that leadership programs are often funded under P2 grants. And, those programs are designed at the state level. They certainly service business facilities. So, that fits with P2 grants. These were not programs designed with federal input. So the way we try to walk that line is to just ask that when leadership programs send their results to us from their applicants, that they send us the business part of those results. And perhaps as a follow-up step, it might be good to have more conversations with leadership programs and so forth, which we can do. I think that's the way I can answer it. It is a good question, and so that's so I think leadership programs are sort of an interesting case in general. P2 grants are by statute to be given to assist businesses to adopt P2. The scope of source reduction assistance grants is indeed broader.
Okay, great. It looks like we do have someone from EPA who may be able to answer the previous question if with them.
That would be great.
Okay, so I'm going to mute Dan. Dan, you're unmuted now. You can answer the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest this was the question for whether you need to submit an ND report as well as an FY20 report. I think what you should do is talk to your EPA project officer, the program contact particularly, and they can provide you what they'd be looking for.
Great.
And that's the project officer in the region.
Okay, great. We have a few more questions come in, Cassie.
Okay, let's keep the question.
Are hospitals, prisons, and universities eligible under the P2 grant services?
Good question. Let's start with the easy ones. Universities. Many universities are affiliated. Let me see here, first of all. Universities can certainly receive PG grants. Many of them are affiliated with states. Hospitals, so, you know, I'm hedging a bit. I know this has often been a topic through the years. I think hospitals are often perceived as businesses. Prisons these days are sometimes for-profit prisons, and universities can be business-like. So I am going to ask that, you know, either somebody else from EPA chime in, or that we have the ability to follow up on that, because I know this has been a discussion throughout the years, and I think there may be a more precise answer than the one I've just given. So I will either invite somebody else to chime in, or the promise that we will follow up on that question via email.
Let's see, I'm not seeing anyone say they can answer the question. Related to that, we got a question: does the nonprofit status or school will determine if it is a business or non-business?
That might very well be the pivot point, because if it's nonprofit, it's nonprofit.
Okay, well, it seems, question that just came in: will programs be able to view the results in aggregate?
Yes.
I'm not.
Oh, go ahead. Was there more to the question?
No, that was it. That was it.
Okay. So in the templates that we're going to go over in part 2, if people, we strongly encourage people to use the templates that we have provided. So the advantage of using them is that they do aggregate results that are put in. Those templates are designed to capture facility level results with a tab for each facility, and there is an aggregating feature within the template so that those results are aggregated. In the database that we're working on, it will also have that feature of aggregation at multiple levels, both at the project level, the grant level, the state level, the region level. There's different ways of that can be aggregated.
Okay.
I hope that answers it.
Just a general question that we've gotten a few times. Some people are asking if the presentation will be available to view later or for future reference.
Yes, I believe that this will be put on our website. It's being recorded, and I think it'll and the slides will be available as well. We hope people use it as a reference. Yeah.
I think we went through most of the questions we've gotten for part 1. So if anyone has any last minute questions, you can type them into the chat box. Otherwise, I think we can move on to part 2.
Okay, let me just advance the slides to that part.
All right. Well, as we move into part 2, we have a quick poll just to help us decide how to pace the next couple of slides. So the question is, are you planning on reporting 2020 results from a grant awarded in 2016 or 2017? Please select yes, no, or not sure. And if you haven't answered the poll yet, please do so now. Oh, all right. So it looks like we have 62% who have said no, they will not be reporting on reporting 2020 results for a 2016-2017 grant. 34% say not sure, and 3% say yes, they will be reporting 2020 results for a 2016-2017 grant.
Thank you. Thank you for conducting the poll. So with that in mind, we'll just go over what is available here in part 2, and then we will consider how deeply we want to go into the slides for the requirements for 2016 to 17 grantees. So part 2 is definitely focused on these grant reporting requirements provided in the request for proposals. Our primary emphasis is what is covered first here, and those are the requirements for the FY18 and FY19 grantees. As we expect, most of fiscal year 2020 reporting will be from these grantees. We next in the lineup, we have a review of the RFP requirements for 16-17 grantees. So we're getting some indication that some know they will be reporting these, some aren't sure, maybe they will, maybe that won't materialize. So I think we will be able to move through those 16-17 slides fairly quickly. The information that is here is available as a continuing resource in the slides themselves. And of course, we're available for follow-up. So we will give it a light, but hopefully adequate treatment. And then we end with a preview of the fiscal year 2020 to 2021 request for applications, those requirements and resources. Some of the highlighted material may be helpful even for this round of fiscal year 20 reporters. The RFA awards are still in process. So with that, we can advance. So this is an overall pictorial representation of what we'll be looking at. There are certainly similarities among the reporting requirements through these three, we'll just refer to them as RFPs. They all require facility level reporting, and they all tailor the requirements according to the project category, and by project we mean type of work conducted under the grant. So we'll talk more about that. There are some differences, and the reporting requirements have evolved a bit over time, and we're not going to talk about it right now, but it'll come out as we move along. And the three areas that we want to keep our eye on are the specificity of the facility level reporting requirements, the sample reporting formats that EPA has provided, and the follow-up requirements as they have evolved over time. Okay, so we will start with the FY18-19 grantees, and we will consider each of these aspects: facility level reporting, sample worksheets, and follow-up requirements, which are reasonably explicit for 18-19. So the requirements are specified by project type, and we'll be going over those. There are P2 work tends to fall into several major bins. that would be the direct technical assistance that is done at a facility. Then there are the leadership and green certification programs. And finally, there is training for broad audiences through webinars like these and other sorts of efforts aimed at a larger audience. And so we have, the requirements are tailored to each of those situations. We are going to use the screenshot views here of EPA's optional reporting worksheets that were provided in the appendix of the RFP. And since understanding follow-up requirements will impact how to report and when to report which data, we will begin there. And we expect that there will be follow-up reporting in fiscal year 20 from the grantees of 18 and 19 funded grants. Okay, follow-up requirements call for reporting in steps. The first step is to report facility identifier data and recommendations made to the facilities in the same fiscal year that the recommendations are provided to the facility. So for fiscal year 20, if this applies, it would be if recommendations were made to a facility in fiscal year 20, whether they got outcomes or not, and we would like those recommendations reported. Okay, next step is to follow up later. So to quote from the RFP, within the 1 year that the recommendations were provided, or by the end of the grant, follow up with a facility to see which recommendations they implemented and which are planned. After follow-up, update the reporting documentation in 5 aspects: the follow-up date, which recommendations were implemented, the costs associated with implementation, if that information can be shared, outcomes, and that would be only those that are implemented, not planned, and outcomes, again, are our environmental measures and the cost savings associated with them. So those that have been implemented, not the ones that are merely planned to be implemented. And for the recommendations not implemented, what the barriers are. Finally, the idea would be to update any prior fiscal year reporting, the file that was probably kept in FY19 for this stuff, rename it with the current fiscal year for submission. We'd like to note that grantees may design their work plan and budgets to set aside some of the awarded funding for a 3rd grant year. This would allow grantees to perform required follow-up and reporting for businesses. Required follow-up and reporting for the businesses they provided technical assistance to late in the grant cycle. So if funds are awarded for 18-19, the 18 funds are usually provided at the end of 18, so the work is actually going on in 19 and 20. So if technical assistance is provided to a business, more than halfway through fiscal year 2020, that leaves a rather short window of opportunity for follow-up, and to allow a longer window for follow-up to get a better sense of what they actually implemented. That's where this extended work plan into the 3rd grant year can be very effective. So grantees can discuss this with their EPA project officers in the regions. Now we're going to turn to the template, the reporting instructions. We're going to look at the instructions section of the grant information and instructions tab. This template is provided as an Excel workbook. It is on our website. It has this initial tab, which is the grant information and instructions tab. It has an aggregate tab where we'll come back to, and then it has these facility specific tabs. And so we're going to walk through these. So in the instructions section, here are the essentials in summary form, and then we're going to, in the next screen, look at exactly what the instruction section looks like. But the idea is that for these three kinds of work, taking them in order, direct facility assistance, the idea is to fill in the required data fields in the grant information tab and the facility tabs using one facility tab per facility. Next, the green certification and leadership programs. Because in 1819 we provided a single template, and because we'll see it is designed in its prepared form for direct facility assistance, for those doing green certification and leadership programs, they simply need to skip the recommendation fields. We'll show that picture here in a moment. Same thing for technical assistance to broad audiences. The one difference is that only good faith effort is required in terms of follow-up. So now let's move ahead. So here is the screenshot as it appears in the FY 1819 template. We can see across the bottom that, we're on that grant info and instructions tab, summary results, another synonym for aggregate, and then these various facility tabs. So the fields here that are highlighted in sort of the greenish shade are the ones that are required. And the prior sort of summary statement was a restatement of what is provided in the row 18, the instructions in row 18. Well, combination of 17 and 18. So the prior slide was an effort to shorten this, but here it is for reference. Okay. The next slide shows the facility information section of a facility tab. So there, for each facility that's visited, there should be a tab devoted to each, and it starts with entering the facility information. So note in the next screenshot that the minimum required data are these 4 elements, and they will be highlighted. There we are. So there's the shot. There are several optional fields, and then the ones highlighted in green are the required fields. Facility name, facility identifier, facility contact, the NAICS code, that's required. Facility city, then what's required, facility state, the region where the facility is located, the NEA for the facility, the NEA that's addressed for that facility, the date that the recommendations were provided to the facility, and the date when folks followed up with the facility to see what they implemented. Okay, there we are. Next slide shows the rest of the facility tab, the bottom portion of it, which is where the P2 actions and outcomes are entered. We'll note that and we might go back and forth between this slide, which sort of sums it up, and looking at the actual screenshot. So let's start with looking at it from the frame of a direct facility assistance project, where we have a 2-step data entry process during assistance, which is when the recommendations are entered, and then after follow-up. So this is the way it's laid out, where in column A, so this is one facility, right? So this is where the various recommended actions, there are plenty of rows, probably don't need them all, where they're listed. So those would be entered initially then the rest of this in this template is designed for follow-up. So if implemented here means if it was actually implemented. It doesn't mean if it's planned to be implemented. So the idea is rows B through K are filled in after follow-up. That's an important point. Oops, where have I gone? Okay, so now so we could see that it was a two-step process. The one where you enter the recommendations, and then you come back after follow-up and you fill up rows B, columns B through K. Now, if it's a certification or a leadership program using this template, it is a one-step process. So let's go back and look at what that means. So we would ask state leadership and certification programs to simply retitle this particular field so that instead of saying recommended, it says implemented. This would be in right here in column A. We just call this implemented. And then just fill it in from there. There will not be a follow-up date in this case. It'll just be, what was implemented. So once and done. It will be the same thing if training is provided, technical assistance is provided to a broad audience through training, a webinar, what used to be in-person roundtables. And again, this would be rephrased to implemented. There actually would be a follow-up date because it would actually, the only way somebody would find out about it is if they went back and contacted the people who were in that broad audience to find out if they implemented anything as a result of what was provided to the group broadly. And the instructions, if we go back to that original slide where the instructions were, this is a good faith effort. That's the only thing that's required. So if you conduct a training, if you provide a webinar, a good faith effort to get back in touch with people will suffice. So let me see if I can. Okay, so now we're going to contrast the requirements for 16-17 grantees rather quickly. So here was the requirement as stated, this second bullet here, in the RFPs. For expected outcomes, include a plan to document results at the facility or entity level. And there were sample formats provided, which were simpler. There was a table for reporting results from direct facility assistance or training if applicable. And we'll see that all facilities are put into one table. There was a separate table for reporting results from leadership program, similarly fashioned so that all facilities are in one table. And then the 16-17 approach to certification programs or similar sector initiatives was a formula approach. The idea was to say how many facilities adopted the standard practices and provide a model formula for calculating average sector facility performance. So, these requirements are more streamlined than for 18-19. So this is just saying here are the tables. So this was the table for the 16-17 grantees on technical assistance, where it's one table, first facility, second facility, description of activities implemented, and the outcomes achieved. So, it was a more streamlined approach. This is what was provided for leadership programs. This was actually taken from what one leadership program actually submitted to us. similar in that the facilities are listed, and then they happen to, their indicator, their environmental result, if you will, that came next, what they did to get it. They had a baseline in. So this was offered because this was a model that we saw, that we liked. We understand that not all leadership programs document the same way, but this was what we offered as an example of what to do. Here's our short comparison between 16 and 17. In terms of reporting requirements, they were more general in 16, 17. They became more specific in 18 and 19, and they became more specific by project type. In 16, 17, the sample format EPA provided showed a preference for linking specific facility action to the outcomes, P2 outcomes achieved. In the 18, 19, that became more specific, and it was broken out by these three project types. So there was some project specificity within 16, 17, but again, it was at a more general level. The formats were simpler in 16, 17. They became more robust in 18 and 19. There was no downloadable file for 16, 17. There is for 18, 19, even though I don't have that bullet in there, but it is, well, it says it right there, downloadable Excel workbook from our website. And in 16, 17, there was no specific follow-up requirement, yet it was implicitly needed to determine which actions were implemented as a result of direct assistance or training. So it was implicit, just not explicit. With an 18, 19, it became explicit, and including exactly what to follow up on. Okay, so now we're going to give the preview of the requirements for 2021, and then, you know, we'll have another open question and discussion opportunity. So the follow-up requirements in 2021 are the most explicit of all three. Let's take a look. So here are some of the main differences. 2021 grantees will have 3 reporting templates to choose from. Right now, they appear in Appendix E of the RFA. We will be putting the Excel versions of the templates on our website for the fall. If there are any 20 reporters who draw inspiration from what is in Appendix E, you know, feel free to get any ideas from them. We will be using the screenshots again, and we will be doing a comparison of 18-19 to 2021. So in this case, if you're in, say, certification state leadership there, or training and webinars, you don't have to go in and change the title of any headings. That's why we have now broken them out into 3 separate templates. You simply use them as presented. The next slide is looking at template 1, the P2 actions and outcomes portion. The facility information section is pretty much the same as the prior year, so we don't spend time on it here. So we're looking at where the differences are, and that is in the portion for reporting the P2 actions and outcomes. So it is still a 2-step data entry process when there is direct assistance provided to a facility, during assistance and after follow-up. What's new here, and hopefully improved, is that it allows users to document both the anticipated outcomes and the confirmed implementation outcomes. So let's see how that works. Where am I? Okay, here we are. So in column, what is column A? We still have where the recommendations are entered. We're actually showing a sample here. And so the instructions now allow in columns B, so from the cost through the water use, the annual reductions, the dollar costs, and the annual reductions. This offers the opportunity to track. My mouse has a mind of its own. Keep my hands off my pad here. So, and the way we solve this is we have created in the implementation column is split out so that it gets a yes if it is implemented, and the instructions in the online version make clear that then you go back and you amend the entries under the cost and annual reductions to make clear that with that check mark yes for implementation, that those values now represent the implementation values and not preliminary estimates. We ask for comments and to include the customized quantities. Well, we've improved the wording there, but the idea is to say exactly what was done. Often a recommendation can be stated in a general way, and this would be a perfect example, a perfect place to put in like the kilowatts achieved, or how many megawatts in a solar array. It just makes the information more precise, more understandable. There's still an opportunity to indicate if something was not implemented and whether there was a barrier or whether they're going to get around to it in 5 years. Okay, now we're going to look at template 2, which is designed for the certification and leadership programs. So it is designed for documenting implemented actions. It does not document recommendations. So this is very much like 1819 in its simplicity. It does include, we can see a peek of the information above, the date the recommendations were provided, the dates of follow-up, and simply when the actions, so the actions that were implemented and what was achieved. I'll show the last screenshot, which is of template 3. It is formatted like template 2. The instructions are modified, again, to make clear that a good faith effort is sufficient. So that little asterisk there, specific P2 recommendations to a business are not required where P2 tech assistance is broadly provided. However, EPA expects good faith efforts to follow up with businesses within a year of when the technical assistance was provided or by the end of the grant period to report the information described above. Our brief comparison. Both the 1819 requirements and those that are coming up have specific requirements by these different project types: direct assistance, green certification and leadership, and assistance to broad audiences. In direct assistance, the reporting requirements are very similar. All the way down, the requirements are very similar. Now, looking at the comparison of the format, 1819, there is one sample Excel workbook template online, instructions on how to use according to project type. So in 2021, that has now been broken out into 3 workbook templates, one for each of these major categories. For each of them, the idea is to use one workbook per project category. So even in 1819, the idea is like you would not report the results of direct technical assistance and a leadership program in the same workbook, because it would make understanding the aggregate outcomes achieved by either one of those activities very hard to sort out. It also makes it hard to go back and do a 2-step process when it's captured in the same workbook as something that has a 1-step process. So if you want to understand the aggregate value of your direct technical assistance to businesses, it works well to use one Excel workbook for that can aggregate those results. And then similarly, to have a dedicated workbook to a leadership program so that the value of those outcomes can be aggregated and managed. It just becomes a lot easier when one workbook is devoted to each one. In 1819, you have to document the confirmed implementation outcomes. The opportunity in the 2021 format is that you can document both the anticipated outcomes and later come back and revise them with the confirmed implementation outcomes. We are nearly at the end here. Comparing the follow-up requirements, very similar. In 1819, it was stated as within the 1 year that recommendations were provided or by the end of the grant, the grantees must follow up with that facility and report 5 things. In 2021, the requirement reads a year after P2 recommendations were provided to a facility or by the end of the grant. They must follow up and report the same 5 things, this time with comment. That comment field is provided and required because it's so helpful in explaining how implementation may have actually turned out, as opposed to maybe a broader recommendation. And we have arrived at open mic. So I will pause and turn it over to you, Michaela.
Great. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box and we'll answer them now. We did give an answer to the question from part 1 about the eligibility of hospitals, prisons, and I believe it was universities. So Michelle from EPA said that P2 grants may only be awarded to state entities, such as those affiliated with the state, like state health agencies, state EPAs, colleges and universities, and federally recognized tribes may apply. Eligible entities may partner with ineligible entities, such as private hospitals and prisons referenced in the question. So hopefully that provides some insight to an earlier question. And all right, and then some new questions we've gotten. With the direct facility assistance for 2020 and 2021, now you will, oh, sorry, let me start over. With the direct facility assistance for 2020 and 2021, now you will enter all the recommendations with the projected numbers. Then during follow-up, you add the check marks to those projects they implemented, correct?
Yes, the one thing I would add is that we strongly advise that the numbers that were entered when they were preliminary estimates be modified. So, you know, they could be the same, but in general, I think we would expect to see them probably change a little bit. So it's with the expectation that those numbers are revisited when that check mark goes in. But I think the questioner has the generally right idea. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Then a question regarding documenting follow-up implementation. If the facility had technical assistance during the FY 2016-2017 grant period, and you follow up and learn that they implemented in 2020, do you go back and use the report from 2016-2017 to attach to the 2020 report, or report it in the 2020 spreadsheet?
So a good question. So I guess that I'm understanding this correctly. If you from a 16-17 awarded grant and you find out that they did something in 2020, what is the right vehicle for reporting it? It could be yeah, so if it is a grantee who has received successive grants, so they were both awarded a 16-17 grant and they've been awarded a more recent grant, could they report it sort of in combination with what they're reporting on their more current grants? Good question, thinking about it on the spot. I mean, I'm going to buy myself a little time and say it could be reported separately, you know, as just a separate attachment, if you will, a separate table. If it could be combined, I guess I guess the format could be used from one of the more recent templates. Just make sure that when you're filling it out on the grant information page, just make clear, you know, that it was a 16-17 grant. So I don't think there's any problem with using more contemporarily, you know, more currently available templates. Just make clear that that the grants are just have a separate workbook for that 16-17 stuff, and indicate that the grant was from 16-17. That would work fine. I hope that answers it.
All right. We don't have any other questions right now, but if you have questions, you can submit them through the chat box.
We may have a very up to speed group of participants on the webinar. That was a lot of information to go through. Good.
So we have a question. Can you send attendees the link to the 2020 download tool?
We will when it is available. It is going through a refinement process right now. So what we can do is we have the list of everyone who registered, and you provided your email addresses. So when it becomes available, we can send you the link.
Great. And we just got another question come through. Is there guidance on what percentage of the grant budget is allocated to measurement of grant results?
If one of my colleagues on the line has a better answer than I do, feel free to chime in. I think, I don't know that we have a specific recommendation. I think it's fair to say that the direction of the program over the last couple of years has placed increasing importance on documenting results, with the hope that one of the values of the program becomes the model it presents for others to learn from what has been funded by grants. So that the value of the program is not only how many facilities are reached, but there's this legacy of learning that goes forward that would lead to broader adoption of these principles. So I think the measurement and documenting and checking back and stuff has been of increasing importance, and I think we expect that would be reflected in how the grantees allocate their time and money. We understand that, that this stuff takes time.
And Dan said that he can help answer that question. So
that sounds excellent.
Okay, Dan, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Actually, Kathy, you gave a great answer. The reporting is very important to us, and being able to share those lessons learned. So, and we recognize that's going to take resources. So I think what we were looking for is in your budget for you guys to list what you think the budget will be required for the follow-up that we described in the RFA, and discuss that with your project officer. If you feel that there may be some reallocation needed to do the reporting we're looking for, that's something to discuss with your regional project officer and to talk about maybe making some adjustments to your work plan or budget.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Okay, a question. When will EPA be announcing P2 and SRA grant awards?
I'm going to think that either Dan or Michelle might choose to answer that.
Okay, I will unmute Dan again to answer that. Dan? Let's see. Michelle says that we anticipate all awards will be issued by September 30th, and announcements will occur soon after that.
Great. I thank Dan and Michelle for being on the line.
All right, so we don't have any other questions that have come in, so we may be able to wrap up a few minutes early, although if you do have a question, you can send it in through the chat.
Wait another moment, I suppose. Nice to know that we're kind of coming in on time here.
All right, we haven't had any other questions come in. So thank you, Kathy, for a very informative presentation, and a big thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. We hope you found this webinar helpful. And Kathy, I did send your email again through the chat for those asking. So they can contact you with follow-up questions.
Yes, please know that we are just an email or phone call away. And, you know, keeping up the contact with all of you who are so important to the pollution prevention program at the state and federal level is very valuable to us. And we promise to respond to any follow-up on anything from this webinar. Thank you for attending.
Yes, thank you again to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thanks. Bye.